A lot of what we've seen in the polling has been, up until this last round of polling, has been a lot of change, a lot of shifting between who voters want, who's in the lead, who's rising, and who's falling. We've clearly developed a top tier of 4 candidates of Buttigieg, Warren, Sanders, and Biden. And from every month, those have been the top 4. And the ordering between them tends to shift back and forth a little bit. To a certain extent, it seems to be how good the press each of them is getting, particularly Warren and Buttigieg, that they rose in prominence. They both were first in at least one of the polls, and that seemed to coincide with the coverage that they seem to be getting in both the local and national press. Sanders, in contrast, has been pretty stable. His poll numbers don't seem to move very much. It seems like Iowans know exactly what they're getting with Bernie Sanders. I mean, which makes sense. He's been running for 5 years on essentially the same platform and giving largely the same speech. And so people know what they're getting. There's just not a lot new to learn about Bernie Sanders at this point. Joe Biden started high and has sort of fallen back a little bit. I think some of that is people learned a little bit about Joe Biden, but they also learned about the other candidates. When we came into the race, everybody knew who Joe Biden was, and they knew exactly who he was. And so as time has moved on, the other candidates have sort of taken some of the support away from him as people have figured out they might have liked someone a little better than Biden. The other striking thing is that there's this large gap between those 4 candidates and the rest of the field. I mean, this is a large and very diverse field. And normally in the caucuses, or normally in primary campaigns, we see a series of rise and falls. We see candidates come out of nowhere, surge ahead or surge near the top of the polls, and then sometimes they fall back. This was been the case in the 2012 Republican primary, was the case in 2016 for the Republicans, and that's not the case so far. There hasn't been a breakthrough candidate who's sort of reached anywhere near those top 4, and those top 4 have stayed the top 4. None of them have fallen dramatically down to the rest of the field. And so while we have a lot of shifting going on, there is also this sort of stability of who's in the top and who's everybody else. One of the things that this tends to show up in addition to the polls, has been a lot of the campaign events that have been going on. The crowd sizes that these candidates have been getting. Those top 4 are the ones that draw the big crowds. Those top 4 are the ones that seem to have the best offices and staff in the state as well. And when you go to events like the Liberty and Justice Celebration or the Polk County Steak Fry, those are the campaigns that seem to have, well, at least those top 3 of those top 4, Biden, Buttigieg, and Warren, seem to have the biggest presence, seem to have the largest crowds, seem to be most engaged with the state party on these events. The Sanders campaign has been a little bit of different, where it doesn't take these large party events quite as seriously, or don't seem to be quite as engaged. And again, that seems to be part of this Bernie Sanders is Bernie Sanders, and we know who he is. We know he's a little bit of an outsider to the party, and so it makes sense that he hasn't necessarily been as prominent at these large party fundraisers.